Hello, hello, fiends. We meet under better circumstances, but I'll explain the rest at the end of the video. Welcome to Borrasca 3. Without further ado, let's get started. Do you think she blames herself? I don't know, man, probably. I said. I stretched out on the reclined seat of my Chevy and pulled the bill of my hat low over my eyes. But do you think she's okay? He said. I didn't answer him. I certainly hadn't been okay when Whitney died, and Kimber was even closer to her mom than I was to my sister. She was definitely not okay. Sam, seriously, he said. I'm fucking freaking out over here. It's been 2 whole days. I pushed my hat up off my face and looked over at Kyle, who was admittedly a wreck. His eyes were bloodshot, his face sallow, and his red hair was so damn greasy you could cook a burger off of it. I said to him, dude, her mom ended her own life. You know how close Kimber was to her mom. She just needs some time, but she'll be okay. He said she hasn't answered any of my calls. I've left her like 9 voicemails. Man, I think I'm going to go crazy. He said, just worried and concerned. I said, hey, reassuring him deeply. You just have to give her space. He said it's stammering and just losing bits and pieces of his voice, saying, yeah, but she's my. He still couldn't say it around me. I'm supposed to be looking after her. I sat up and pulled the chair up right next to me. Up next to me. Just frantically trying to reassure him, saying, look, Kyle, I know you want to help Kimber, and I want to help her too. But she hasn't answered her calls, been to school, or come to the door when we stopped by her house. We gotta admit, man, we gotta say she doesn't want to see us right now, and we have to be okay with that. Right now, she knows what's best for her. But what about the note? You think that has something to do with it? He said. I sighed. We don't even know if there was a note. Her dad was upset and messed up when he said that, and it's possible I misheard him anyway. I asked my dad, and he said there was no letter. Right, because your dad is such a beacon of truth. One look at Kyle told me he immediately regretted those words he said. I shrugged. I don't know what to believe anymore. I just felt extremely indifferent, but I still wanted to support him any way that I could. The truth was that I know what I heard. Mr. DeStaro had said something to the cops about a letter, but I couldn't tell Kyle that, especially not right now. He was already worried that his relationship with Kimber was part of the reason her mom had been so down. I'd asked my dad about the letter when he'd come home after that long night, and he sighed, run both of his hands through his hair in a tired way, and said, Sam, I don't know what to tell you. And DeStaro didn't leave a note. And this is the first I specifically have heard of it. With our best friend in mourning and our investigation on hold, Kyle and I had been existing in sort of a suspended state. We went to school intermittently. Honestly, we skipped classes here and there, missing end-of-year tests and smoking more weed than either of us could afford. Without Kimber there to set us straight and keep us in line, we were lethargic, brooding, and way beyond irresponsible. I never realized how much we relied on her. Kyle and I skipped actually, we skipped the last 2 periods of the day and debated on whether we should even come to school tomorrow, which was the last day of our sophomore year. We finally decided to show up for second period, which I was glad we did because Kimber showed up in biology. I didn't see her at first. I had my head down, resting on folded arms, when I felt a meek hand pat my shoulder. I turned around to see her there, unsure and uncomfortable. I gave her a half smile and pulled her into a hug, but it wasn't a super comforting, not at all awkward Kimber hug. It was a longer, weaker hug, and I felt so protective in it that I was sad when it was over. "How you doing, Kay?" I asked her when she finally released me. She wiped a tear off her cheek and said meekly, "I'm okay." And she gave me a wobbly smile, and I knew it wasn't true. I wrapped her into another quick hug as Phoebe Dranger gave us a snotty look. "Have you seen Kyle yet?" "No, I have next period with him. He's been worried about you." "I know," she said, sliding her eyes to the floor. Things happened hard for me, especially at home. "It's okay," I said to her. "We're here for whatever you need." "Yeah, that's what I was hoping. Whatever you need," I reassured her. Since it was the last day of school, our teacher, Mr. Founder, was just happy to return our graded tests and let us bullshit the rest of the period. Kimber talked about the arrangements for the funeral that weekend and chided Kyle and I for skipping finals to get stoned. We were just so ecstatic to see her. But when the bell rang, we saw that Kimber was excited and nervous to see Kyle again. But as we packed up our bags, I assured her that Kyle wasn't mad, just worried, and she threw her bag over her shoulder, set her jaw, and nodded. She tried hard to keep it together. As soon as Kyle saw her from down the hall, he slammed his locker shut and walked towards us with such intensity that I began to wonder if maybe he was mad. He pushed past a dozen people without so much as glancing at them and left a curious, if annoyed, crowd in his wake. When he finally reaches, Kyle threw his backpack against the wall and swooped Kimber up in the sort of way you see in an old black and white movie. Everyone who watched this, including me, groaned in unison. Since most of the teachers weren't even bothering to take attendance that day, I went to calculus with Kimber and Kyle, where they both had the same conversation Kimber and I had last period. Towards the end of the hour, the conversation faltered and became very uneasy. But Kyle and I exchanged a look over the top of Kimber's head, and I nodded at him. And this is where things turn awkward. "Kimber," I said quietly, "did your mom leave a letter?" "What?" Kimber asked in surprise. "I heard your dad talked about a letter that day, Tuesdays, I remember." I said, "Oh." As we waited for her to continue, the bell already had rung, and it was for lunch. Everyone already filed out the room, but the three of us stayed, just sitting. "Kimber?" I asked again. She sighed sadly and looked over at Kyle. "Yes." "What did it say?" he asked nervously. "I don't know. I haven't seen it. I asked my dad for it when we got home, and he said I misheard him and there was no letter." He said not to mention it to anyone else or I'd just upset people. Well, then we both misheard him. I said, which seems unlikely. I've known my dad for all my life, and I would know when he's lying, she said. People started to filter in for the next period, sliding sympathetic glances at Kimber. Since it was our lunch period, we gathered up our things and we walked out to my car as we always did. I sat in the back seat, letting Kyle and Kimber take the front. Kimber took a deep breath and continued. I know my dad is lying. I know he has that letter. Are you sure? Kyle asked. I could tell he was still terrified that some of the blame rested on him. Yeah, and I know it contains the name Prescott. I think I even know where it is, she said. Prescott? Prescott? Yet somehow I wasn't that surprised. He was the axis around which everything bad originated. How do you know it says Prescott? Kyle asked. I heard my dad reading it once. I think he reads it a lot, actually, she nervously just said. He was sort of sobbing and whispering the words and throwing things in his office. And Dad hasn't been that well either. Do you think she was having an affair with Jimmy Prescott? Kyle said. I shook my head. I'm guessing you need to think bigger than that, Kyle. I agree, Kimber said awkwardly, with their hands in her lap. With everything we know about the Prescotts, I'm fairly sure this isn't about an affair. It's all connected somehow, don't you think? My dad was the love of my mom's life, but she only left a letter for me. I think that somehow I'm the one she wronged, not him. You know, I think she did something to me, or maybe she did it because of me. And her voice began to broke over the last sentence, and Kyle pulled her over, kissed the top of her head, and whispered words to her that I couldn't even hear. I said, all right, let's go get that letter. After giving them a minute for a while, Kimber said, yeah, I really need to read it. How do we get it? I asked. If it's in the office, we just need to wait until Dad isn't home. Kyle said as he looked out the window. You don't think I didn't think of that? Kimber said. He never leaves his office. Not since we got home from the hospital. He sleeps in there. So we need to get him out. No, we need to get me in. Tomorrow is my mom's funeral, and half of Drisking will be there, including my dad, of course. I need to leave without him noticing and run home so I can go through his office, Kimber said. Okay, that's easy, I said. Without my dad noticing, and I need to be back by the end of service, she said. We both nodded, but stayed silent because it looked like Kimber was weighing on saying more. My dad has been very cold, and I think he blames me. That's bullshit, Kyle said. Can you guys help me? Kimber said. Absolutely, of course. Me and Kyle both said separately. We spent the rest of the lunch hour creating a plan for a far more strategic plan and for the mission, especially needed, because me and Kyle would engage Mr. DeStaro in conversation, and then Kyle would get a text from Kimber telling him she was having a breakdown in the bathroom. Kyle would leave to go comfort her, you know? And they would take my car to the DeStaro house. I would stay behind and keep an eye on Kimber's dad while they were gone. I went to work that afternoon for the first time since Monday. Mira seemed to be in a much better mood and let me go home early since it was a Friday. I didn't sleep well though, and I got up at 4 a.m. to go through my clothing looking for something dressy and mainly black to wear to the funeral. My dad came in before he left for work and found his disheveled, panicked teenage son looking helplessly through piles of black clothing. He smiled pityingly and led me to his own closet. Since my dad and I had not only the same face, but the same build, as well finding something suitable to wear was easy, I thanked him. And he asked me to apologize to Kimber for having to work through the service, and that he sends his love. And DeStaro's funeral was at the Episcopalian Church on the other side of town. I picked Kyle up at 9 and saw he was also wearing a suit of his dad's, though he didn't fit in it nearly as well, and he was constantly pulling the sleeves and readjusting the waistline. Unfortunately for Kyle, he was much smaller than his dad. We parked as far away from the church as possible, where we hoped no one would notice a car leaving. When we went back inside, we saw Kimber, who wouldn't have to do as much acting to convince people that she was having a breakdown as much, because we found her at the back of the room, tucked in the chair, in the puddle of curly orange hair and tears. Kyle sat down next to her and pulled her into a hug. Jesus, Kimber, what's wrong? I kicked his foot in a slight bit of rage, and he looked up at me, and he bit his lip and realized, oh, fuck. Kimber whispered, "There's no one here." My mom grew up here and she had hundreds of friends in this town, and no one came. We looked around and I had to admit that turnout was sparse. A few groups of maybe 3 or 4 people standing there. Kimber's dad, who sat in a chair opposite the room of his daughter, with his head in his hands, and some family I recognized from a barbecue over at Kimber's house. Ex-Sheriff Cleary with his wife Grace. They were there, standing with a few of my dad's deputies and talking quietly in the corner. I could see why Kimber was upset. As we waited for the service, I started to realize I've never been to a funeral before. I wish we had one for my sister, but I knew we could never, since Whitney was still legally alive. It made me sad to think she would never be laid to rest. Only a few other funeral goers trickled in, and the pastor began getting people seated for the service. I noticed the casket at the pulpit for the first time and was glad it was closed. Still, I had to wonder at the simple, unadorned, almost ugly coffin that had been chosen for Kimber's mom. I knew that the Staros had money. Quite a lot of it, actually. And it was an interesting, almost insulting choice, especially for Kimber's case. You know? But Kyle and I stood up. Kimber did too, and we started to part over to the pews, but she stopped abruptly. "I'm ready," she said, and brushed the hair away from her wet face. "Ready for?" we asked. "To leave." "I can't be in here anymore," she said. "It's a disgrace to my mother." She raised her head a notch and set her jaw. And I knew this look. It meant that there was no reasoning with her anymore. Cal and I looked over at each other. This actually wasn't part of the plan. It'd be a lot more obvious if Kimber was missing from the service, especially with the low turnout. "You guys go over and say what we rehearsed to my dad. Kyle, I will text you in 30 seconds. Go," she said. Kyle nodded and started over, and I knew we weren't arguing. Mr. DeSaro was finally standing, looking over at the front pew reserved for him and his daughter with hesitation. "Mr. DeSaro," I said as we approached, "I'm very sorry to hear about your wife. She was..." Shit, I'd already forgot my lines of what I was going to say to him. Kyle chimed in. "A great woman who raised a wonderful daughter," he said. "Yeah," he spat. "Do great women often end themselves with wonderful daughters alone in this world?" he said. Ah, shit, we both even thought. "Do great women even jump off of buildings and make spectacles of themselves and leave their families to leave with the publicity and the grief?" he said. His phone chirped. Kyle's phone finally chirped, and thank God. "Oh, that's Kimber," Kyle said a little too fast, before he had time to actually look at his phone. "Oh man, she isn't feeling well. She's crying and feeling sick. I'm gonna go help her." "No!" Mr. DeSaro yelled so suddenly that Kyle dropped his phone on the ground, where it made a loud clatter on the stone floors. "Not you. Don't you ever help my daughter. Don't you even talk to her. He can go." And he pointed at me. "Okay," I stuttered. "The plan changed way too much. I need to somehow get the car keys from Kyle without being seen." Kyle gave me a shaky but subtle nod, and then he and Mr. DeSaro went to sit down. It was obvious Kimber's dad was going to keep an eye on Kyle, but getting the keys from him was going to be nigh impossible. I backed into the shadows at the back of the room while the pastor started the service. I texted Kyle 4 times, slightly desperately asking for help, but he wouldn't dare touch his phone. He just stared straight ahead, flicking worried glances at Miss DeSaro every few seconds. After several minutes, I went to find Kimber to find that, well, really to see what she wanted to do. But she wasn't in our meeting spot by the back door, and our plan fell completely apart. I pulled out my phone, and I sent her a text. "Where are you?" I said. I texted her some more. "Kyle is next to your dad, and I can't get the keys away from him." I waited in the hallway for a good bit, tapping my phone against my hand nervously. After a minute or two, my phone vibrated. She texted back, "I'm sorry, I left without you guys. I had to get out of there. I'm sorry. I'll be back before the end of service, I promise." Shit, I thought. I text her back, "Be safe." It was now imperative that I was not to be seen. I went to the men's bathroom, locked myself in the stall, and played Snake for the longest 20 minutes of my life. And I knew the service wouldn't go on much longer, so I texted Kimber again. "Hey, are you on your way back yet? Did you find it?" I waited, watching the minutes tick by, and I texted her again. "I think the service is ending. Where are you?" After another 7 minutes of no response, I called back, but it went straight to voicemail. I tried again with the same result, and I got nervous. I tried a third time when two people walked into the stall, and my phone vibrated with a text, and it was Kyle. The service was over. Kyle texts me, "Kimber has the keys. Why aren't you guys back yet? Did you find anything?" I sat there appalled, and I left the bathroom without washing my hands and received dirty looks from the two strangers at the urinals as the door closed behind me. I found Kyle staring out the window looking for my car. "Kyle," I said to him. He jumped. "Where's Kimber? What did you guys find?" "I don't know. She left without me." "What the fuck? Why? Where is she?" "I don't know, Kyle." "She left without me," I reiterated. "She's not answering my calls or my texts." "Fuck, mine either. We have to keep an eye on her until her dad, or just something until she gets back." "We're not the only ones," Kyle said, gesturing across the room. "What the fuck is going on?" Three men were talking to Kimber's dad in the corner across the room. Chief among them was Killian Cleary, who was flanked by his two former deputies. Drisking's retired sheriff had his hand on Mr. DeSaro's arm and was speaking to him in an angry, hushed tone, and Kimber's dad was shaking his head and desperately objecting to something. The two deputies walked out the front door of the church, and Mr. DeSaro sagged against Killian Cleary, who sat him in a nearby chair. Something was happening. "Call Kimber now," Kyle said. I tried again, and this time the call rang twice and was sent to voicemail. I ended the call and threw my hands up, looking desperately at Kyle. "Again," he said, and took out his own phone. I got the same result, but felt a jolt of relief when someone answered Kyle's call. When someone answered Kyle's call, but it wasn't Kimber. "Phil, what part of town are you in? I need a ride. It's an emergency." I waited. "Yeah, man, I'm at North Ridge Church. As fast as you can. I'm with Sam. I'll owe you." Kyle hung up and then immediately tried Kimber's phone. "She's sending me the voicemail too," he said. We both stood there for a while, just enamored, staring at each other. and I was just hooked on what he heard. But we both anxiously waited until Phil's silver Mazda pulled up. And Kyle chewed his lip and I tapped on my phone. Come on, Saunders. We threw occasional looks back at Kimber's dad until clearly stood him up and ushered the now inconsolable men out of the church. Suddenly, Kyle's phone chirped and we both looked down to see Kimber's name flash up on the screen. Kyle's knees nearly bucked in relief, and he just sagged against the wall. Kimber said, I found it. Kyle opened the text and furiously typed a reply. Kyle said, they're coming for you, Kay. A quick typo on my end that I messed up and I'm deeply sorry for. It turns out when they called Kimber, essentially no one else picked up, but Kyle ended up calling someone else to get a ride there. Now, if the two were patient, she might have come back, but now things are very getting heated up, and who knows? So let's find out. We both stared at the phone waiting for a response, and just as the sun blinded us as it reflected off of Phil's approaching silver sedan, we got one. They're here. It was the last message we got from Kimber. When Phil dropped us at the Starra house, we found the front door unlocked and no home. My car was sitting in the driveway, unlocked with the keys in the ignition. Kyle and I drove back to the church, but the funeral was over, and the few people who attended were gone. We drove back to Kimber's house, but it was just the same way we left it, and no one was home. Kyle had lost it by this time and was an absolute wreck. He called her so many times, I was sure he killed her battery. His calls went straight to voicemail and his texts were unanswered. After half an hour of begging from Kyle, I finally called my dad, and he answered immediately. Sammy was wrong. It's Kimber. She's gone, Dad. We've looked everywhere, but her and her dad are missing. She left the funeral early, and Killian Cleary was talking to her dad, and then Samson and Greg left, and I think they got to her house and they got her. Dad, I think they're still working for Cleary on the side or something, and I think they're doing something bad. Whoa, he said. Slow down. Come by the station and let's talk. I'll take a statement from you boys, and I'll send a couple of officers to investigate the house. Right now, just calm down, Sam, and we'll handle this. I hung up and threw my car so violently in reverse, and I jerked that wheel to the left as I hit the end of the driveway. Kyle said, Sam, how do we know we can trust the cops? I retorted back to him, I'm not trusting the cops. I'm trusting my dad. I said, as even my own words sounded hopeless. They sounded even hopeless to me. I turned into the sheriff's office and Kyle was out the door. As soon as I slowed down enough to park. By the time I got inside, my dad had Kyle by the shoulders and was nodding solemnly at everything Kyle was telling him. And when my dad saw me, he motioned for an officer to take us into his office. After a few minutes, he came in and sat down across the desk from us. Alright, boys, I'm going to have Officer Ramirez come in for a few minutes and take a statement from the both of you. I want you to know at this point in time, it looks like the Destaros left town voluntarily. Kyle was still losing it. No way, Mr. Walker. Kimber would have never. And my dad held his hand up for silence. Let me rephrase, he said. Jacob Destaro left town voluntarily. Kimber is a minor and has no legal rights here. If her dad said they're leaving, unfortunately then they're leaving. Kyle, still not hearing any of that, said, but she's not answering her phone. If we went to the house, Dad, nothing was packed. And he retorted back, maybe they're getting away for a while. Maybe going to her relatives. I can't theorize as to why she wouldn't answer her phone. Other than that, maybe she wants to be left alone for a while. Kyle was exasperated and said, but... And my dad retorted back, look, I know it's hard for you to understand, but losing a family member takes a toll on the person. Sam, you know that. We don't know how people are going to grieve, and we don't have a right to. I think it's very likely that Kimber will be back by the fall for school. And Kyle lost his shit even thoroughly. The fall? Sheriff Walker? That's 2 months away. You need to investigate now. And my dad, still being reluctant and calm, said, Kyle, I know you're upset, and no one said we're not going to investigate this thoroughly. And without hesitation, I said, like you investigated Whitney's disappearance thoroughly? I spat and I didn't even regret those words. And he retorted back with even worse. Sam, he snapped with more force than I had ever heard him use. I am tired of listening to you insulate that I didn't do everything I could to find Whitney. I love your sister more than you can imagine. She's my damn daughter, Sammy, and I am never going to give her up. Kyle interrupted. And what about the deputies that left the funeral to go after her? Kyle interrupted. My dad raised up an eyebrow at me. Sampson and Grigg, I ground out through clenched teeth. He sighed. Boys, Sampson and Grigg left the funeral because I sent them out on the call. I stood up violently and I knocked my chair over in the process. Oh, come on, Dad. Alright, that's enough. And he slammed his hands on the desk and stood up. I told you. I would tell you what I know and what I have. I understand your friend is important to you, and god damn it, the Destaros are friends of mine too. I promise you that I will use the full extent of my resources to track them down and put your minds at ease. But until then, all I can offer you is reassurance. Just the singular assurance that there is no sign of foul play this time. You boys need to get off this warpath and let us handle it. Now, Ramirez is waiting in the hall to take your statements, and then the both of you are going home. Understood? I said nothing and glared at my dad, seething with rage. Kyle stood up too and walked out the room with no emotion whatsoever. He walked past Ramirez and I followed him out to the car. We got in and I waited for Kyle to say something. All I heard was a loud sniffle. And looked over at him to see his face, slick with tears. It was the first time I'd ever seen Kyle do that, but not the last. Kyle said to me, "He's lying. He whispered. He whispered so faintly that I could still even hear him. I just shook my head. I didn't know what to believe. Kyle turned his face away, peering at the window. I know he's lying. Something bad has happened and he's lying about it. I knew my face was brimming red, more upbeat than it should have been, but not in a good way. I asked, what happened? But as Kyle tried to collect himself, I kept hearing more sniffles. I kept saying to him, dude, you gotta fucking talk to me. What do you think happened? Kimber's gone like all the others. So she's at that place where all those bad things happen. And I kept punching the fucking steering wheel. How the fuck had this happen? Not Kimber. Anyone but Kimber. How could it even be Kimber? Was all of this because of me? Had her mother ended herself because of something I've done? Something we found out? Was Kimber taken away because of me? If I had thought for one moment, for 1 minute, that any of this was true, I would have cracked into tiny pieces. But no, not Kimber. Anyone but her, just no. But Kyle yelled at me, saying, yes, Sam, fucking think about it. It's that tree house. It's all the same. Borrasca, the Skinmen, the triple tree, your sister, the mountain. It's all the fucking same. It's the Prescott Empire. And the one person that we both hold dear, Kimber, consumed by it. Fucking consumed by it. Where do we go? And I could feel the warm tears of my desperation and hopelessness sliding down my cheeks. What do we do? What do we fucking do? Cal threw his hands up in frustration. We have to go to Ambercott, right? It all starts and ends up at the Triple Tree, Sam. Surely you figured that out. We've been to the treehouse a million times, Kyle. There's nothing there, as we both just sounded exhausted, defeated, teary-eyed, and every negative thing you could feel. Kyle then said to me, I don't know where the fuck else to go, Sam. I don't know where else to go. We have to go to Ambercott. Suddenly, a rap noise heard. I jumped as someone tapped on the window of the car, and I wiped the tears quickly off my face, rolled the window down as Officer Grigg leaned down and looked in the car and said, you boys move along home, alright? Yep, I said, and turned the key in the ignition. He waved at us as we pulled out the parking lot, but we didn't wave back. The treehouse, Kyle said. We both drove in silence, determined but very desperate to get a hold of ourselves if we were going to be any help to Kimber. We need to be calm enough to think logically. I parked in the space next to the trailhead and saw several bikes tied to the posts. As we made our way up the West Rim Prescott Ore Trail, we passed Parker and a couple of his friends coming down it. I nodded to him and Kyle said nothing, just staring up at the trail, reaching for the only place he knew to go. It was almost dark by the time we got to Ambercott, and there was little left light to search for whatever Kyle had hoped to find. It took half an hour in the darkness before I finally convinced Kyle that there was nothing there to help Kimber. And though we didn't speak it, we were both painfully aware of the sounds of the night. We were scared, terrified down to our very bones, that we could hear the piercing scraping, grinding, and metal screams of the monster at Borrasca that we become so accustomed to over the years. We both dreaded it, prayed it would not come, and we didn't even dare to speak of it. We somehow made it back, and I dropped Kyle at home, and I promised at first light we would go find Kimber tomorrow. I swore to him we would. He gave me nothing more than a shallow nod and disappeared inside his house, and my dad was waiting in the kitchen for me when I got home a few minutes later. I then looked at him and walked over to the fridge, realizing I hadn't eaten all day. My dad then said to me, "Sammy, sit down. I want to apologize for today." I took out some chicken and cheese and went to the pantry for bread. He then kept going on and continued, "I know you're scared, and I know that a lot has been going on that you can't exactly relate to." He sighed. Anne was depressed for a long time. A good long while, Sam. Over 20 years, and that weighs on a person. I ignored him and continued making my sandwich, but I was dead inside, wondering if I could even trust the person called my dad. Wondered if my entire life that if I could even trust him. She was suffering, Sam. He kept going. And sometimes people who suffer that deeply don't know any other way out. She knew it was hurting her husband and daughter, and maybe she mistakenly thought she was doing them a favor. "Mom's depressed," I said, without taking my eyes away from my task. He sighed. "Your mother is coping okay, and this was very different, Sam. Kimber's mom has been depressed since she was in her 20s. Early in her marriage, Anne suffered multiple miscarriages. Infertility can be hard on some couples, and not even Kimber's birth could ease her pain." I then said to him, "Dad, with all due respect, I'm tired, and I'm going to bed. Cal and I are getting up early to look for Kimber." I threw the knife in the sink with a loud clang and turned to my dad for the first time. "Please tell me you're still trying to find Kimber." The sheriff stood up from the kitchen table, looking as tired and disheveled as I felt. "I promise, Sammy," he said, and I finally believed him. The next morning, when I pulled up to Kyle's house, Parker came out to meet me. "Hey, Parker," I said to him, when I rolled down the window and the cool morning air wafted in. Parker then said to me, "Kyle's not here. He left around 5. Stole Dad's truck. He's pissed, so you better go." "Thanks, man," I said to him, and then rolled up the window and took off down the street. I drove around all morning looking for Kyle and calling his cell, but he didn't pick up until afternoon. He then said to me, "Sorry, man. I couldn't sleep." He sounded a lot more stable than yesterday. "That's cool," I said. "Where you at?" He then said something that shocked me. He said, "I don't know exactly. A rare spot where I'm somehow getting service." I said, "Are you in the woods?" He said, "Yeah, she's out here, Sam. Somewhere in these mountains. I can feel it. I know it." "Alright, well, let me meet you." He said, "Okay, just come down to the West Rim Trail and I'll meet you there." I was only 5 minutes away, so I arrived before Kyle had time to get down to the mountain. And Mr. Landy's red Dodge Ram was parked haphazardly in the no parking zone, and I figured it would probably get towed by the time I got back, or specifically by the time we got back. I doubted Kyle cared at this point, though. I crossed my arms and leaned against my car as I waited for him, staring up at the dirty red trail in impatience. And when he showed up about half an hour later, he was covered in sweat, dirt, and dejection. I said, "So?" I said, pushing up off the car. "Nothing, man," he said. I then said to him, "Alright, let's keep searching." We hiked miles and miles of mountain that day, but we didn't find any sign of human life. And for the next few days, if the sun was out, so were we. Cal was growing more and more desperate, crossing into private property to look for logging equipment, and mapping out the county's many mines to search the abandoned buildings. But the mount was big and the needle buried deep in the haystack. And as the days slipped away, so did his sanity. Every time I saw my dad, he gave me a sober look and promised me that they were still looking. It seemed that even he was growing concerned, that the Starr house still remained as cold and empty as the space between the stars above it. On was our 11th night, the 11th night of our Kimberless existence, and I was woken up to the troubled sleep by the piercing, whirling, screeching sound of death at Borrasca. I cried myself back to sleep at the tortured sounds of Kyle in agony next door, knowing we failed her, knowing Kimber was dead. Alright. That was heavy, especially towards the end. I have a personal stake within all of this. So let me take the mask off to just level with you.